Hello, everyone. So my name is Casey Evans. If you haven't met me virtually or in person yet, I'm our Associate Dean of Admissions at Wesleyan. So excited to see you. And I know I say this every week, but I appreciate getting to see some familiar faces. Honestly, part of this is a little more fun than in person because I get to know you guys week after week. So that's kind of cool. Normally, during a normal kind of recruitment process, I would probably only get to meet you, once or twice. So I feel like I'm getting to know a few of you a little better, which is pretty cool. But we're excited that you joined us. I'm really excited for this class, especially. I think philosophy is fascinating. So I am really excited to get to kind of virtually participate with you all. But to kick us off, so as always, we want it to be as interactive as possible. So I'm going to pass it over here in a second to Professor Kelahan. But just to give a little brief introduction, so she is one of our philosophy professors. I feel really lucky. I've gotten to know her a lot better this year. So we got to serve on a committee together, which hopefully one day we'll be back together in person. We have a lot of fun on our committee. So I'm really excited to get to work with you guys and let you get to meet her too. But I think something really unique and kind of cool is that Professor Kelahan, Emily, also is an Illinois Wesleyan alum. So she will have lived the experience that you will get to live and now is on the other side getting to teach and interact with you in that sense. So definitely excited for that. I also have here with us two current students. So Ria and Marcia are here with us. I don't know, actually, have you guys ever taken a class with Professor Kelahan?
No.
Not yet. Okay, cool. So first time with them as well. But they've joined us, so that way if you do have questions from current students, you can definitely ask of them. And then also they can help with the class discussion. So I've told them they can participate the same as you. So you'll get to kind of see what a real virtual class is like. So Ria and Marcia, do you want to say hello quickly and just tell us who you are so everyone can see you pop out from the list of everyone?
So my name is Ria. I'm a sophomore biochemistry major. I've taken a few philosophy classes, so I am kind of familiar with how this goes, but I'm interested to see what we're going to be learning today.
Great.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Marcia. I'm a senior health promotion and fitness management major. I've only taken one philosophy class, so kind of new to this, but yeah, I'm excited.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. I go by Emily. Those who have taken philosophy classes before, Marcia and Ria, know that my entire department goes by its first name, and you'll find that that's kind of a departmental culture thing on campus. There are some departments that go by professor, this and such, and there are some departments where everyone goes by the first name. In the philosophy department, we go by the first name, so it's totally fine if you call me Emily. Today, our topic is going to be lying, and I'm going to treat this just like I would treat an in-classroom class. So unfortunately, that means that I'm going to be cold calling on some of you, because normally what I would do is I'd have us all go around and introduce ourselves and answer a brief question to get us warmed up for the conversation today. So I'm going to have to cold call you because I see this Brady Bunch tile of different faces. And so I'm going to have to go through and call on you, if you don't mind, and put you right on the spot to answer a question. And if it might make you feel more comfortable, maybe I'll start with Ria and Marcia. Would that be okay if I put you on the spot first?
Yep.
So the question we're going to start with is, do you think it's more important to be polite or be honest? So I want to get you thinking about honesty in preparation for our conversation about lying and when and if it's okay. So we've all been in these scenarios where we kind of have a choice to make. Do I be honest or do I do the polite thing? Let's say that your next door neighbor has dropped some cookies off on your front porch during this quarantine situation, and they've tried a new recipe and they're wondering, is this new recipe I cooked up any good? And so they ask you, what do you think of those cookies? This is like a new recipe that I made. And you have a choice. You can tell them your honest opinion. Let's say the cookies weren't so good. Or you can be polite and say, oh, they were really good. Thank you. So I want you to think through what you do in those kinds of scenarios where you have a choice between being polite and being honest. And I want you to think broad here. So as you think about being a member of a society and existing in a culture, what do we value more, being honest or being polite? And after we go through and answer that question, I'll ask what we perhaps should do. Maybe you're somebody who thinks that we tend to value politeness more than honesty, but actually honesty is more important. So Rhea or Marcia, are one of you feeling like you have a stronger opinion on this question?
Well, so from when I was younger, just the first thing that popped into my head whenever you started talking about this dilemma was when my mom taught me when I was younger. It was like she wasn't teaching me this, but she was just kind of telling me sometimes that it's better to give someone a little bit of a white lie than tell them how you truly feel. So, or you just don't want them to really feel bad about themselves. So like this girl, she didn't get any flowers from our dance recital. And so my mom told her that we left her flowers at home. So we ended up like not actually getting her any flowers. So we went to the recital, like we went to the store and got her some flowers. And I was really confused. I was like, we didn't get her any flowers. And she's like, well, maybe sometimes it's okay to give a little bit of a white lie. Mm-hmm. So that in turn promoted her like happiness in the end. But I don't really think it hurt anybody. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay, great. Lots of good ideas in there. I'm going to flag the issue of a white lie, and I'm going to flag the issue of harming others. Marcia, you want to help us out?
Yeah, I kind of agree with Rhea. I feel like especially in our society, we're kind of trained to do the polite thing versus telling the like cold hard truth. And I think you can see that in like really basic interactions, like when people ask you like, oh, how are you doing today? A lot of times they're not wanting a genuine answer. They're just wanting yeah, I'm doing fine. And then you move on with other like social interactions. So I think that's like ingrained in us from pretty much the very beginning to tell these little white lies that long-term may not have a very negative effect, but can add up. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Right. Now I'm going to ask, does anyone feel like jumping in before I start cold calling on people? Okay. Julia, you're on the hot seat. Is it more important to be polite or be honest?
Sorry, I had to unmute it. I don't really know. I feel like honesty is a very important thing. Like, I see this thing sometimes where it's like among women, there's like the 5-minute rule where if somebody can fix something in 5 minutes, then you tell them, but if they can't, you don't. And so that would go from like something in your teeth, your lipstick smeared, something like that. So I think it really depends on the situation, because going back to like harming others, you don't want to hurt someone's self-esteem or potentially put them in a bad situation. So I think it really depends on the situation, because there's not always a right and wrong.
Interesting. So I hear now, in addition to thinking about whether we're harming someone, which is a really important factor to weigh, another factor we might want to weigh in considering whether it's appropriate to lie in a circumstance is, can the person do anything about it? Will my saying it do any good? Which is a little bit different than avoiding harm. Can I facilitate some good? Can I put some person in a position to do something to improve their situation by being honest with them? Interesting. Cool. Evan, how about you? Can I put you on the hot seat next?
Yeah, sure.
That's fine.
I meant Evan Carlson?
Yeah. Okay. That's crazy. There's 2 Evans here. But yeah. Well, I think in my own life, I probably, like looking back, I think I value politeness more overall. But I think when we were talking about what society values, I think we value, at least outwardly, honesty more. Like, I think we like to say that more, but I think internally we value politeness more.
Interesting. So is it possible that we say we value honesty, but when you look at what we do instead of what we say, we actually default to politeness?
Yeah, so we're actually lying about valuing honesty.
Very good. Excellent. Haven, can I ask you to chime in next?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Cool. Yeah, I kind of agree with like some of the statements like Evan and somebody else said too about how I think that society values politeness. Like they value the image, the concept of honesty, but they prefer when you're polite. I think the real skill for me is developing the ability to be honest whilst being polite. I don't think it has to be totally separate. And I think that's a really hard skill because sometimes honesty is very uncomfortable. And to have to confront something really uncomfortable but do it in as polite of a way as possible is really important. And that's not a skill that I think everybody is learns.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. You've just pointed out something that we point out a lot in philosophy class, which is that I may have presented you with what we call a false dichotomy. I presented this situation as though it's this or it's that. And Haven's putting some pressure on that and saying, well, maybe we don't have to make a choice. It's possible to be honest while also being polite. Good. Aiden, can I ask you to chime in?
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
All right, cool. I feel like a lot of times, I don't remember who said it, but they were talking about regular interactions with people.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people might feel that it's not polite to be honest with them if I say I've had a really tough day. Like when you're saying hi to somebody, people what they said was people are like, oh, how's it going? Oh, I'm good. Okay, cool. But if the situation was how's it going? Oh, something terrible happened, they might be like, oh, I don't want to burden them with what's actually going on. So they just say it's okay when it might not.
Interesting. So you brought up another scenario where we're maybe trying to protect ourselves or others, or maybe keep something from going deeper than we would like it to go, by kind of giving either a pared down response or an altogether dishonest response. Yeah, I'm fine, when maybe you're really not fine. Interesting. That's a good test case. Taylor Glass, do you mind if I call on you?
Yeah, I think it does depend on situation a lot and kind of what the get out of it, because this always brings me back to in drama when we're giving critiques for people's performances. Your natural tendency is to want to say, oh, it's wonderful, you did a really good job, but that doesn't often give a lot of room for improvement. And so we learn kind of how to give a critique that says, oh, I like this part about what you did here, and I thought that this detail was really cool, and maybe you can work on doing this so that you're simultaneously giving your honest opinion whilst not tearing them down. So I think it really does depend on the situation, whether or not you really want to be honest or whether you just want to be polite.
Interesting. You also bring up the issue of the situation or context. And I think when I think of the theater, I think back to what did our other friend say here? Oh, we had someone disappear. The idea of the 5-minute rule. So if you're in the middle of a performance and someone comes off stage and they ask, how did that go? And it went terribly. You don't say it went terribly because they have more acts to get through. But maybe after the entire performance has concluded, it would be appropriate to say, yeah, Act 3 didn't go so hot. Here's some critical feedback. Great. Sydney, can I ask you to contribute here?
Okay, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, I think that I agree with a lot of people who are saying it depends on the situation. I think that whichever option or whichever combination of each is more beneficial to you and the other person. Sometimes you have to be mean per se to get yourself out of a difficult situation, or if you're critiquing them on something that might help them in the future. But I think it also depends on how close you are to the person. Someone you just met as an acquaintance, you can't be necessarily as honest before you build trust, and you don't want to make them think that you're an awful person. But if someone who's really, really close to you, you can be hey, I'm critiquing your work, but they know that it's out of love.
Excellent. So you bring up something that hasn't been mentioned yet, which is, what is your relationship? So if your very best friend in the world asks if the outfit she's wearing looks good, you might be honest and say, that's really not doing anything for you. Wear this instead. But it would be a totally different story if you were to just stop someone on the street and say, green's really not your color. Who do you think you are? That's not a relationship in which it's appropriate to do that. Interesting. Barbara, do you mind if I call on you?
Can you hear me okay?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, for me, it depends. I don't see anything bad in telling lies to strangers. I mean, I don't really know them, and maybe I can use some important connections with them months or years later.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about my best friends, I prefer telling truth because I think that it is more important to be honest with your wants, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they will be offended, but I think they deserve to know what you think.
Good. Yeah, you're shedding light on another subject that would be interesting to talk about, and that is friendship. And what do we value about friendship? And one of the things we value about it is a kind of special relationship where we're permitted to be more honest than polite in a lot of cases. And that's one of the things that we all get out of being friends with people. Great. Kira, do you mind if I ask you?
Yeah, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted. I can hear you.
This might be an unpopular opinion, but I feel like it's more important to be honest than anything else, just because I think it was Sydney that was talking about how like the relationship does matter between a person, but in the end, if you're trying to establish trust between two people, I feel like it's more important to outright start with the honest, like the very honest truth, so then that they know that you wouldn't lie to them.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like, yeah, in most scenarios, it does matter on the relationship between the people.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, I feel like it's more important to establish the very honest truth first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you think about personal reputation, what kind of person would you rather be known as? Someone who keeps it real and is honest, or someone who's very nice and polite? Andrea, do you mind if I ask you, what's more important, being honest or being polite? I can't quite hear you.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted. You're just very faint.
Okay. Awesome. I would say it's a mix of both, and a lot of times it depends on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're not gonna, like they've said, you're not gonna like outright tell an acquaintance like, oh, like that shirt does not look good on you, but you might get to tell your friend that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. It depends is always a very welcome answer in a philosophy class. Sarah, would you mind chipping in?
Not at all. I really like the perspective of what all the people have said already.
Mm-hmm.
I think politeness and being honest needs to be a balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take the relationship into account and also how that'll affect the other person.
Mm-hmm. Great. Colby.
So I think that being honest should come first over being polite, because if you're honest to somebody, you're building up that relationship with them. And I think it gets to the point when you're honest enough that it's just you are being polite to them by not holding anything back, by allowing them to see things that need like critical feedback or something that, say, you might not agree with. Being honest with somebody could hinder the relationship a little bit, but I think when you both realize that you are trying to do it for the benefit of both people, it becomes the benefit of growing, not the benefit of, I'm going to tell you this lie just so we don't have to go into detail of this anymore.
Interesting. I like mentioning growth. In relationships, we have to take risks, and maybe that means risking someone's feelings temporarily, but in exchange for that, we get deeper growth over time. Cool. Other Evan Turnbull, please.
Yeah, I agree with what Colby said a lot. I think you kind of have to judge it on your time sentiment. Is it going to be beneficial to benefit the other person in the short term or the long term? Being polite kind of aids the short term kind of view, but being honest kind of helps them in the long run. So I kind of tout how I see it. And I think being honest is the for sure way to go in most circumstances.
Cool. Disadvantage of being later in the queue is everyone has added a lot of really good content. So as we go on, don't feel too much pressure if you agree with much of what's already been said. All right, next up, Caleb.
Hi everyone. I personally in my life, I know that I value honesty more. I've been told by that by many people. I've gotten in trouble by my mom because I value honesty more. Um, and I tend to value honesty more just like as a person, just because I feel like if I'm not telling someone the truth, I feel like I'm not being polite to them. Because if I'm lying, then I'm like, well, I'm lying to that person. That's not polite for me to lie to somebody. So just for me, it's like I just have this feeling where it's like it's hard for me to lie. But like obviously there are scenarios where it calls for it. Like some people have already stated where if it's something people can't fix, then like why like hit somebody hard with like the truth, like, oh that stinks or whatever, and then they can't do anything about it and then it just makes them feel terrible. But in most other situations I feel like it's almost always um polite if you are honest to somebody, like if you tell them the truth, because if you don't tell people the truth and they figure out that you're not telling them the truth, then it creates an even bigger problem.
And it's not a coincidence that we have the same last name. Our dads are brothers. So that Kelahan's an unusual last name, and there's an explanation. And I can confirm, yes, Caleb does care more about honesty than politeness. All right, we've already heard from Marcia. How about Ella?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say that, like, as a society, we probably value politeness more, but also I think honesty is a pretty important part of being able to, like, have healthy relationships and stuff. So I feel like lots of times what happens is, like, how we mentioned with, like, the white lies and stuff, where you try and put honesty into the politeness so that, like, with the cookie example, you might say, oh, these were good, but I liked these ones better that you made like before, so that you kind of get around not having to tell a lie in a way and like offend them, but you're still like kind of leading them in the right direction, if that makes any sense.
That makes total sense. My mom is a big fan of doing this. She'll tell me something looks interesting, and that's her way of saying, maybe that's not the most flattering thing.
Yeah.
Let's see, I think I already heard from Sydney. You jumped off and jumped back on. Mick, how about you? Mick? Hey, you're muted.
Sorry, I couldn't tell if there was a Nick or something also in the class. I get that a lot. So
I bet you do.
I think, at least in my experience, being polite really doesn't matter that much unless they assume you're also being honest. So like if everyone went around with the assumption that every compliment they got was just someone being like polite to them and just being like courteous, then like you don't really have much real human interaction at that point. So I don't know. I feel like being polite is just an extension of honesty. Really, it's about manipulating how you phrase the truth to let someone down easily, I guess, at least in my opinion.
Great. Okay, so I think I've already heard from Julia, and that leaves, last but not least, Haley. Haley, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. There is also a chat function. I haven't drawn attention to that. If you haven't used Zoom before, you can type into chat if you suddenly have microphone issues, which does happen from time to time. So I'll just model that now so everyone can see. Anytime you want to ask something, feel free to go ahead and type it in the chat. And you also have the option of sending a question privately. So if there's a question you want to ask that you don't want to put in front of everyone, you can send a question just to me. Okay, great. So that was like a pretty accurate model of what would happen in the classroom at Illinois Wesleyan. We really strive to get everyone talking and everyone interacting and to build a rapport, not just between you and the professor, but between you and your classmates. Normally, I'd have a little bit more time to get everyone talking, so I may not have everyone contribute that much on the very first day of class. But the idea is that you're not just going to be sitting in your seat listening to a lecture. You're going to be actively participating and supplying a lot of the ideas and content for the day that we're going to be talking about. So I teach in the philosophy department, and one of the things we try to achieve is to get you thinking critically, speaking carefully, raising objections, learning to reply to objections to your own point of view, and just thinking really hard about really difficult problems. We often say that learning to philosophize is like swinging with two bats. If you can think hard and write clearly about the things that we think about and write about in philosophy class, you can think and write about just about anything. So one of the things that we do is we proceed by putting forward a proposal or a definition of something and then trying to object to it or knock it down. So what I want to do for the rest of our time together is I want to talk about what is lying. I want us to try to come up with the definition of lying. So I'm going to put out some proposals, and I'm going to ask you to do your best to raise an objection and to knock it down. Sometimes we call this coming up with a counterexample. So I will say lying is X, and then you will come up with an example of something that will show me that lying can't be what I said it was. So let me go ahead and get started. I'll put out an idea. Lying is saying something false. I'm going to type this down. Lying is saying something false. That's our first candidate definition of lying. And the game is you are supposed to convince me that that definition is not going to work. Why won't that definition work? And what you should be doing is thinking about a case where someone says something false, but they're not lying. Okay, so I've got Mick saying lies of omission. Mick, can I ask you, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that you can lie by not telling someone the full truth or even saying anything. Like sometimes people assume by your presence and stuff that certain things are, I don't know, like right, I guess, and they cannot be. And so you can lie by like not giving someone else that information, I guess.
Excellent. And you've got some backup here from our friend Julia saying withholding important information is also dishonest. Well, you guys are skipping ahead to my grand finale here. What I was going to have us look at the end is a transcript from a court case, from a Supreme Court case, Bronston versus the US, where this guy Bronston, who's this big corporate CEO, is personally under investigation for racketeering and money laundering and all of these white-collar crimes. And when he is asked, do you have any money in Swiss bank accounts? He answers no. Then the prosecuting attorney asks, have you ever had any money in Swiss bank accounts? He says, the company has had money in Swiss bank accounts. We've had some accounts in Zurich. Guess what? He also personally had bank accounts in Zurich. But when he says the company had accounts in Zurich, he's saying something true, but he is leaving out this other fact that's important, which is that he also personally has bank accounts in Zurich. So that's exactly the kind of case I'm interested in, one where we're withholding information, which is also a form of lying. Yes, he said something true, the company has accounts in Zurich, but he's leaving something out, which is a kind of lie of omission. Okay, great. So that's one way of counter-exampling the definition I put forward. Lying is saying something false. You're saying, well, that's not a broad enough definition because it doesn't include these cases where you say something true, but also leave out something true that's important. Good. Can anybody think of another way that this definition is flawed? Lying is saying something false. Is it always the case that every time I say something false, I'm lying?
Can I say something or do I type it?
Go ahead and say it.
I think also a form of lying is you may not necessarily know. It still counts as dishonest, but if you don't have all the information personally, or if you're only using biased accounts of situations and you're not looking at the full picture, when you make a claim that says like, this is what's going on, this is what is right, all of that, and it not having the full, it's still a form of being dishonest because you didn't look through all of the information, if that makes sense. So that may not be as intentional, but you're still looking at the wrong sources.
Interesting. Can I contrast two situations and you tell me what the relevant differences are here? So I've just proposed lying is saying something false. And let's suppose that my husband asks me where the peanut butter is. And I say, the peanut butter is in the cupboard. But little do I know that the last time I used the peanut butter, I spaced out and left it on the counter behind a bunch of stuff. So what I said was strictly speaking false. The peanut butter is not in the cupboard. So I just uttered the sentence, the peanut butter is in the cupboard, but it's not there. So do I have a duty to go and look in that cupboard and verify that that peanut butter is there before I make the claim the peanut butter is in the cupboard?
You could change it to being like, I believe it might be, I'm pretty sure it might, like going all of that, but saying like, for sure the peanut butter is in the cupboard or whatever, like that's still being dishonest, if that makes any sense. Like,
you didn't have the
unintentional.
Oh, sorry. I said that you didn't have the intention to be dishonest because you just didn't know. So here's another example I was thinking of. Somebody that lives somewhere else and doesn't know a lot about Illinois could say that the capital of Illinois is in Chicago. They don't honestly know. But that doesn't mean that they're lying. That just means that they're misinformed, like Andrea says in the chat.
Okay, so you could be misinformed without intending to deceive. But let me go back to Julia's comment. So peanut butter, you might think that's not a big deal. Look, if your husband has to root around behind some other things on the counter to find peanut butter, no big deal. But I think Julia has in mind when people are maybe sharing misinformation on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and using social media to disseminate ideas that they haven't taken the care to make sure are coming from a reputable source. Do you think that the person who does that is more blameworthy than the person who mistakenly tells her spouse that the peanut butter is in the cupboard?
I think the person who doesn't verify their sources is a lot worse than saying like a little thing about peanut butter just because like if you're making a claim, for example, I saw on Facebook my aunt posted yesterday and said the Chinese government created the coronavirus to wipe out the world or something like that. And so my whole family was like, that doesn't even make sense. Where are you getting this information from? And then she gave like a random website that just said it. She didn't really go in and confirm, like, is the source legit? Is it unbiased? Is it more news oriented instead of trying to shift a narrative? So I think if you're going to make a claim like that, especially on a social media platform, but just in general, I think that you need to use like reputable sources and go through all of the steps, or else it's kind of taking the dishonesty of the source to a new level because it's kind of creating almost a propaganda, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think what you're bringing up is really important, Julia, because when we think about complicated concepts like lying, it often exists in a constellation of other concepts. So there's lying, and then there's willful ignorance, and there's negligence, and it's not always the case that those things are the same thing. So I might argue against you that what you're talking about is a case of willful ignorance or negligence, which is different than what we mean to capture with lying. I think we can all agree right now that we can't simply say that lying is saying something false, because it sounds like there's agreement that I shouldn't be called a liar because I mistakenly told my husband that there was peanut butter in the cupboard. that doesn't make me a liar making that mistake. So what if I were to add, lying is saying something false with the intention to deceive? I'm sorry, let me actually say lying is saying something you know to be false. Lying is saying something you know to be false. Are all cases of saying something you know to be false cases of lying?
I don't think so, because especially with like scientific investigations and the data that comes with them, data can be misrepresented, and that could just be through poor analysis of the data. The intent might not be there to lie, but you can find like a correlation between two variables that may not actually be proven.
Okay, that kind of sounds like the first case, Marcia, where I don't know it to be false. I end up saying something false, but it's not as though I am in a position to know that it's false. Good. I see in the chat here, Mick says jokes. Good. Yeah. What about sarcasm? When I'm sarcastic, I say something false. I know it to be false. That's part of the humor. So am I a liar when I'm sarcastic?
No, because of the tone and the situation.
So I use a tone that makes it possible for the hearer of my joke to discern she's not saying this literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Am I a liar when I'm playing a role? Yeah, here we go. Performances such as magicians. Yeah. So if you're performing on a stage, either in a role or as a magician, are you lying to people? When I come out on stage and say, I am Henry VIII.
I can talk on that.
Okay.
I actually do theater a lot. I want to be a musical theater major, but as I can say, as an actor, when you walk on stage, if like you said, if you were playing Henry VIII and that was like a show you were doing, when you step on stage and say, I am Henry VIII, if you were acting, you are Henry VIII. So you're being entirely honest because you're no longer Emily Kelahan, you're no longer whoever you are as a person in real life. You're no longer that person because as an actor, you take on that persona entirely when you perform.
What if you're a very bad actor, as I am, and I'm totally unconvinced by my own performance, and when I utter, I am Henry VIII, I'm unconvinced? Good. Okay, it's got some other comments coming in here. It's not a lie because you're disclosing that it's a performance. Good. So a lot of you in our introduction, when we were talking about is it more important to be polite or to be honest,
That's what I would.
You mentioned I'm loud. Did someone just say that I'm loud? Sometimes I am loud. Okay. When you buy a ticket to something, you are kind of giving your consent. I know that something unreal is going to happen on stage. I know that this is pretend. I know that I'm in a magic show. You haven't been duped into thinking that you're part of something other than what's going on. Yeah, you still intend to perform even if you're bad. Good. So another thing that's coming up here is intention. Excellent. I have Kira saying, I feel like acting is different from lying because it goes back to the idea that the intent isn't to lie, but to tell a story. Great, exactly. What if I said that lying is saying something you know to be false with the intention to deceive? Because you guys have all been talking about intention. Intention's the important thing. So I'll go ahead and add that right into the definition. Lying is saying something you know to be false with the intention to deceive.
I don't know if this necessarily correlates, but like when adults, not like lie to their children, but say like, oh, Santa's real, the tooth fairy is real, with the intent of like teaching them things or giving them like happiness and joy and something to believe in. Like, I don't think that necessarily counts as a lie, but they are still technically deceiving their children.
Excellent. You bring up one of the two things I want to talk about related to this definition. So the first objection that one might raise to this definition is one that's already been raised. Back at the very beginning, a few of you chimed in and said, well, we can't just say that lying is saying something false because sometimes you lie by omitting things. And the other thing so that's the one thing, lies of omission. The other thing I want to talk about is exactly what Taylor just brought up, which is white lies or beneficial lies. So you might say this definition isn't going to work. We're going to need to add something to it to capture these lies of omission. So it's not just saying something you know to be false with the intention to deceive. We might need to add to it. Lying is saying something you know to be false with the intention to deceive, or withholding pertinent information in contexts where you're obligated to supply that information. Okay? But now let's get into beneficial lies and white lies. So I love that Taylor brought up Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy, and now we have the elf on the shelf and all these different things. Is this okay? Is it okay that parents tell their children that there is a man who travels from the North Pole and goes down their chimney and delivers gifts?
Well, that's sort of, or you can talk.
It's great.
Let's go, Evan, and then Taylor.
Okay. Well, I was sort of thinking about how you go to a play or something for entertainment, and it's different because the kid doesn't know that it's an entertainment thing. But I think that you also have to figure out if the definition of lying doesn't have to be a bad thing, you know? So that was a couple different things, but
sure. Yeah, there are some cases where lying might be permissible. In fact, a classic example of this is from philosophy. So there's this very famous philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who wrote in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and he had a really strict moral philosophy according to which lies are never permissible. And the classic objection to this is, well, what if you are hiding Jews in your home during World War II and the Gestapo shows up at your front door and asks, are you hiding Jews here? Clearly, the morally correct thing to do is to lie and say, no, I'm not. But a really severe moral theory that says lying is always wrong may not allow you to do that.
Yeah.
So there may be some cases where lying is absolutely not only permitted, but the thing that you're morally obligated to do.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, you had something to add.
Yeah, I think that it kind of comes back to the storytelling aspect of it, and that when you're telling the lies to kids, it's to give them joy, and it's not like there's no intention of harming anybody there, and it's not going to cause any harm to them, and like then that story isn't going to cause harm to others. So I think it does come back to that storytelling aspect of not intending to cause harm.
Good. I think our friend Haley here agrees with you. I feel like the definition is correct because beneficial lies are deceptive because you are doing it with the intention to make them like you or to give them confidence. Even though it has a positive outcome, it is still deceptive. Similar to Santa, it is just deceiving them for a positive outcome, fun or imagination. And we've got Rhea writing in, those kinds of lies, like Santa, are used to motivate children to do the right things. When you are dealing with children, you have to get into their world and make them understand concepts that are harder for them to grasp. Okay, now we can get into a conversation about what's truly beneficial. So we've kind of agreed lying is okay if in your assessment you find that there's more good done than harm and that there's a beneficial outcome that makes the deception worth it. Is that true in this case? What if I were to push back on what Rhea said here and say, well, shouldn't we be making people do the right thing for the right reason? Isn't it bad for us to inculcate in children the idea that they should be good because someone might be watching them?
Could I say that we don't necessarily have we can't really say what the right reason is totally outright, you know? 'Cause
right.
You can't say with full certainty that one thing is the right way to go about something because there really isn't any real way to prove that or back that up.
And isn't that a relief? I would be out of a job if there were a really obvious answer to these questions. So you're totally right that it is debatable. And in each one of these scenarios, we might have one person have a really good, compelling argument for why she thinks what she thinks. And yet the person sitting right next to her thinks, well, I disagree. And I have my own compelling reasons and argument for thinking that. If you were to spend a semester with me, we would actually challenge that a little bit, though, and sort of really look at competing arguments and ask ourselves, can we make the case that one is better than the other? Is there a preferred view here? Is there a view that has more robust evidence and argumentation behind it?
I think for the argument when it comes to kids and Santa and all that kind of thing, like what I was trying to get at when I tried to say you have to get into their world, when you have a conversation with somebody that's like younger, you'll tell them not to get on top of the table. And instead of like them listening most of the time, they'll be like, why? And you have to give them reasons why. And for them, their mind is just it's growing and it's like a sponge, and you have to start like getting them to understand in a way that they'll understand that's beneficial for them. Because if you don't really motivate them to want to do the right thing in a way that they'll understand, then it's a little bit harder to get them. Because you can't just tell them you shouldn't do this because you just shouldn't. Like, that's not good enough reason. You know? Like, it's not morally right for you to do this. Like, they're not going to listen.
Good. We've got some thoughts coming in on the chat here. So from Caleb, personally, I dislike the idea of lying to your kids about magical holiday creatures like Santa, Easter Bunny, etc. While it gives kids something to believe in, when they find out that it isn't real, it can possibly crush a child or confuse a child as to why this would be a concept. Good. So we've got to think about short-term and long-term. Are you prepared to deal with the fallout once the truth is realized? Good. Lies with malice are the worst case. So Aiden might be trying to get us to think about the fact that, like, look, we shouldn't think of lying as something that's always bad. Maybe there's a kind of spectrum or scale, and there's bad lying and there's lying that maybe is good. Like, here's maybe an example of a lie that probably everyone will agree is a good lie. Let's suppose you're throwing a surprise party for your best friend. And everyone is assembled in a particular location, and your friend really wants to go to that location before the party gets started. And so you have to convince her that we can't go to that place. We can't go to that restaurant. And she's like, why not? And you say, because they closed today for a family gathering. That's not true, but it's what you need to do in that situation in order to achieve this positive outcome. But there are a lot of different types of lying in between that might be better or worse. We've got some other thoughts coming in here. Just because your intention is positive or doesn't have malice behind it doesn't mean that it's not a lie. It could still be a lie. A lot of people in society do not have the moral standards to act always for the right reason. So therefore, those people need incentives. This could be kids just as much as it could be adults. Look, it would be great if we could get everybody to be good people for the right reasons, but sometimes we can't. So perhaps we do need to have incentives in place that involve small white lies. Could be. Sometimes lying can be more beneficial in the short term, but harmful in the long term, and vice versa. So the context matters. Indeed, the context does matter. I think that there are logical and moral reasons to make up for the solutions that Santa / Easter Bunny, etc. provide when children ask questions. We have Haley saying, it is common to lie to your children about Santa and use the gifts as an incentive. But I agree with Ella that in the long term, if the only thing to get your kids to listen to you is based off of lies, the long-term effects will not be positive. And finally, we hear from Aiden, the key part of the surprise parties in the cases that are similar is that you say at the end, it was a joke, or I couldn't tell you about it because it was a surprise. Interesting. That's an interesting thought, Aiden. So when you have something like a white lie where you're trying to distract somebody from a surprise party, you come clean at the end. And ultimately it ends with honesty. And you say, here's why I had to say we couldn't go to that restaurant for lunch because it was being decorated for your party. Good. Okay. So let me put it out to you. We've talked about a lot of things. Is there anything that hasn't come up in this conversation that you think we should be talking about?
I have like a little idea personally.
Sure.
Kind of like I don't know if this is a wishy-washy answer or not, but like kind of like Schrodinger's lie here. Something can be the truth and a lie at the same time. So like kind of like if you think of like the Santa thing, like, but we like let's make it more extreme case where like let's take it to like an abuse stance. And like say a parent is abusing their child and in their mind they're doing it for the right reasons. They're teaching a lesson. They're doing it for good. They're saying these things that aren't true. They don't deserve it. They're not doing it for good reasons. Like the child might not view it that way when they become an adult. So it's a lie to them, but it's the truth to someone else. Can it be both at the same time? Who gets to decide that it's a lie? If one genuinely, their knowledge, it's the truth, you couldn't say or do anything to convince them otherwise. Does it make it not the truth because somebody else views it as a lie?
Excellent. So a question that you will end up talking about almost inevitably in probably any philosophy class you take is about subjectivity and objectivity. So is morality objective? Is there some standard out there according to which we can adjudicate these disputes about what the right thing to do is in these cases? Or is it subjective and it's impossible for us to find some standard by which we can determine who's right in a situation where there's disagreement? I happen to be somebody who thinks that it is objective. That doesn't mean we can always figure out what the right answer is. But I think like a lot of inquiries, the right answer is out there. We just haven't found it yet. So kind of parallel to science, just because we don't know how to prevent the spread of coronavirus right now exactly doesn't mean that we can't ultimately determine an answer to that question if we devote enough time and research to it. It's a different kind of research when we're thinking about abstract things like morality. But I do think that eventually we can arrive at an objective answer to that question and justify it. Kind of back to what I was saying to Evan, that if you were to take a semester-long class with me, we would look at these different arguments and actually try to develop criteria for judging who's correct. So in that case, I would say that it's not that the abusive parent is telling the truth, it's that the abusive parent believes she's telling the truth. She is mistaken about what the truth is. But the fact of the matter is that what she is saying to that child is false. She just doesn't know that it's false because of some psychological obstacle in her. Interesting question. So we've got some thoughts coming in here. I feel like that is why we have therapists, because sometimes you are overthinking. Your mind says one thing, but it might not be the truth. So your brain thinks it's true, but it's not true. Historically, there's a lot of connection between the disciplines of psychology and the disciplines of philosophy. If you think about it, psychology is a really young discipline. It hasn't been around for very long. So when you go back and study figures like the ones that I study from the 1700s, many of them have a lot of things to say about self-deception and how human beings work under cognitive load and how we can confuse ourselves and become have our view of things distorted by stress. So there's really a tight connection between those disciplines. In fact, if you were to major in psychology here, there is a requirement that you take one philosophy class. If there are no other questions about lying and related concepts, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about life at IWU and what class is like. And Ria and Marcia, if you wouldn't mind, feel free to jump in.
If you guys have questions, you could just put them in the chat too if you don't want to say it out loud.
Ooh, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the answer to that question.
Awesome. And I know I'm getting some messages. A few students are going to have to hop off. So if you need to hop off for your other classes, feel free. That's totally fine.
A lot of students do minor. So a lot of the times whenever you join and you take some of your gen ed classes, you start to like take classes and things that you find out that you really like. So I took my gateway class actually was a philosophy class. So then I kept taking philosophy classes on top of that. So if you do enjoy other classes like that, you can start to minor. And they actually might fulfill a lot of your gen ed requirements too. So
Yeah, jumping off of what Ria said, I have a minor in political science. My gateway was taught by one of our political science professors. So it's kind of how I got into it. And minors are fairly easy to complete because they do fulfill a lot of your gen eds as well.
So my favorite part about IWU is basically the community-like atmosphere that we have here. So one thing that you'll notice is that a lot of people have connections with just a ton of people. So just like Casey said, like she has all these connections with professors that used to be like Wesleyan alums, and you can get a lot of connections by joining some clubs. And a nice thing is that you just see people that you know constantly. The campus is small, so anywhere you're just going to be walking around, you'll always see people that you know, and I just really like that.
Yeah, mine too. I think my favorite thing is that you can do basically whatever you want and still make time for it all while you're at IWU. I switched my major as a junior. I'm still graduating on time, and I still was able to hold like leadership positions and random fun clubs and like just do a lot while still being successful academically.
Yes, probably too many on-campus activities for students to partake in. I'd say one of the perennial debates we have on campus is how do we get people to go to all the events? Because on a random Tuesday night, there will be 3 events at the same time. So there are lots of campus activities for students to partake in. We have a huge School of Theater Arts. There are constantly performances both on the main stage, and we have some cool side stages. There are lots of lectures and performances. There are big musical acts that come in to perform, comedians, magicians, hypnotists. There are clubs for basically every interest that you can think of, from board games to Frisbee to intramural sports. And you have a lot of latitude to form your own groups. Would you agree with that, Marcia and Ria? If there's not a group that represents what you're interested in, it's not at all hard to form your own club and get funding to host events and gather together.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of clubs that you can join. There's just like whenever you first get on campus, you have this thing called an RSO fair, which is just all of the student organizations, and you just walk around, and it's kind of like somebody compared it to, if you guys have seen Pitch Perfect, in the beginning of the movie, whenever she's like walking around and like looking at all those clubs, they're all giving her like pamphlets. That's kind of what it's like, except there's like free food and you just get to meet some people. And you'll put your name on a bunch of these lists and they'll start emailing you. You could go to what clubs you want. I got too excited during the RSO fair, and I like am still getting emails from like the sign language club, even though I've never gone. But like there's just a ton of things that you could go to.
Yeah, jumping off of that, I've seen a few questions about like, are a lot of the events free? The majority of the events are all free. I know like all of our sporting events students have access to for free. There's a few, like if you go to a main stage theater production, I think it's like $2 for students. So if they're not free, it's very, very reasonable to go to them. But in our student center, almost every weekend, there's like a free event, whether it be like a movie or like a sip and paint or like ice skating. There's pretty much always something going on.
Yeah, and I just to throw in, I know they've even been doing some activities virtually. So there's been a few different like bingo nights where students have won prizes even though we can't be together. So that's been really cool.
Mm-hmm. ISU is less than a mile down the street, so I know a lot of students who have friends from high school who ended up going to ISU, and I think that there are a fair number of students who participate in ISU activities. I would say it's there if you want it. It's just a stone's throw away. So there's no reason you couldn't participate if you wanted to.
Yeah, I was on the dance team freshman year, and we were just invited just randomly to go to a dance competition at ISU. So that was just like a really nice thing. They just extended it to us just because we are right down the road. So we ended up going and having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a nice thing too is that if Illinois State puts on like career fair events or anything like that, Wesleyan students are more than welcome to go to them.
we do a great job about putting career fairs on our campus, but it's sometimes nice to see different employers that may not be on ours.
Awesome. Well, I hate to be the one that has to be the bad guy and cut the great conversation short, but I do want to keep you guys on time. We promised you 2:00, and I know you have lots going on, lots of virtual chats and hangouts and things too. But just thank you for participating. I know I had a lot of fun, so I hope that you had fun too. I hope maybe, Emily, I might audit one of your classes. This was fun.
Oh, you're welcome anytime. Oh, and this group should know about our first year experience. So we offer these special first year courses, and I am teaching one next semester called Trailblazers, about women and other folks who are underrepresented in various disciplines. So if you're at all interested in signing up for an FYE, Casey can answer questions you have about that. Sorry, I should have remembered that earlier.
No, that's great. Definitely. Basically, anything we didn't get answered for, you just reply back to that email, any email you get, and just say, hey, I have a question from Titan Tuesday. They'll forward it to me and I'll get you connected. So we're happy to get you some answers on anything soon. Sydney, over, I think in May is when the professors will start doing that matching for FYEs. So we're still letting the applications come in, then the professors can kind of dig through all the applications. So hopefully May or June will be the time frame for that. But thank you again for joining. We really appreciated it. Lots of really cool conversations happened. So I'm hopeful we can share this with some other students. I know a few had to miss it last minute unexpectedly, so we can share your great thoughts and content with everyone that had to miss it. But I think it's been really fun, really great. I hope you'll continue to join us.